Intel joins the China camp. Join the Chinese camp? Yes, you heard it right. The giant of American chips announced an important decision: the domestic take back a city. Intel X86 and ARM are the two most powerful people in the world. One is the dominant player in the field of PC, one is alone. Especially the ARM architecture, such as Huawei, Qualcomm, Apple, are based on ARM. It can be said that without the cornerstone of the chip design, manufacturing and other aspects are impossible to complete. But because we started late in the chip structure, so Chinese manufacturers can only rely on foreign technology, but also, the old US attitude toward Chinese enterprises is ambiguous, making us in the field of x86 chips everywhere under control. However, the advantage is that Intel X86 architecture is not irreplaceable, and the British ARM company can also. Because of ARM's exclusive advantage in cell phone architecture, and not under the US control, always maintain an open posture, whether it is the US companies or Chinese companies, can be based on ARM, the chip development. However, just 2 years ago, the US company Nvidia announced a stunning plan to buy ARM. If Nvidia really bought ARM, then the two world's largest chip architecture, it will become a US word. This is certainly bad news for Chinese chipmakers and other regional chipmakers. Thankfully, however, the company's merger plans ended in failure. In such a situation, academician Ni Guangnan warned that the acquisition should be stopped no matter what. At the same time, he also made a valuable suggestion to the Chinese chip industry that it should focus its business on the open-source architecture of RISC-V, so that we can change from reactive to proactive. And what academician Ni Guangnan said is exactly the same. It is understood that in the RISC-V architecture system, 12 of the 14 members are medium-sized enterprises. This means that we have a firm grip on the RISC-V architecture. More critically, CAS has successfully developed the Xiangshan processor on the basis of RISC-V architecture, and completed 2 different architectures. In addition, Ali released the Xiantai 910 processor. Huawei also released the Smart Screen. Although RISC-V architecture system in the short term is not yet comparable with Intel X86, ARM and other architectures, but industry experts believe that RISC-V architecture will become the world's third mainstream architecture. However, a major decision by the US chip giant Intel seems to herald the rise of RISC-V architecture and mark the strong return of the Chinese chip industry in terms of chip architecture. According to foreign media sources, Intel will invest 400 million euros, equivalent to 2.8 billion yuan, in the development of RISC-V processors, as well as artificial intelligence gas pedals, self-driving vehicles, and high-performance computing. The question is, why should Intel invest a lot of money in the competition? Actually, this is a very good question to answer. Because as we all know, Chinese companies cannot use Intel X86 architecture, which means Intel will lose a big piece of cake in the Chinese market. In contrast, the architecture system of RISC-V, 12 out of 14 members are Chinese companies. In other words, once Intel gets involved, it's like jumping through the hoops and getting the Chinese market back into its own hands, so why not? And RISC-V is an open-source architecture, as long as the company can develop. So even if the old American companies want to block Intel, there is nothing they can do. Intel into the ranks of RISC-V, which in itself is a good thing, and can even be said to be a triple win. First, RISC-V can quickly develop and grow. Second, Intel will return to China. And third, the company will come out of the passive situation. Now, RISC-V architecture chip emergence finally attracted the attention of the US chip. Since then the US chip has begun to join, until today's Apple and Intel, 2 major US chip industry leaders, to join. To further strengthen the RISC-V camp, it can be said that now RISC-V has become a prairie trend. Apple's choice of RISC-V architecture, because it hopes to further reduce the license fee of the chip. ARM's license fee is low but also to more than $10 million, while the RISC-V architecture license fee is almost zero. For today's highly important profit Apple, this is a considerable expenditure. After all, Apple is one of the world's top 3 cell phone chip companies. It is now in the Mac also uses its own ARM architecture chip M series. these chips are switching to RISC-V to save licensing fees may amount to hundreds of millions of dollars. Intel's choice of RISC-V architecture is hoped to suppress ARM. ARM has monopolized the mobile processor market. It is promoting chip companies to enter the PC processor and server chip market. Apple developed the ARM architecture chip M series has successfully broken the Intel monopoly in the PC market. The Chinese chip based on the ARM architecture developed server chips have also been adopted by the industry in order to deal with the threat of ARM. Intel, to promote RISC-V into the mobile processor market, can play in the ARM backyard to ignite the consequences. In addition, Google has long developed its own chip, recently began to support RISC-V. It is reported that Google has obtained the US RISC-V architecture CIFIV authorized RISC-V core. The addition of US companies for the RISC-V architecture has been promoting the success of the Chinese chip to occupy the IoT market is undoubtedly an unexpected pleasure, which will enhance the strength of RISC-V and ARM competition. US companies to join the Chinese chip proved the right choice of RISC-V architecture, will certainly send over to prompt more Chinese chip companies to develop RISC-V architecture. RISC-V architecture has been in the RISC-V research and development achievements of Ali Pinto is not stingy. It announced the launch of RISC-V architecture swordless platform to help domestic chip companies to reduce the RISC-V architecture development difficulties. Chinese chip the future is expected to obtain more patents on the RISC-V architecture. Recently read an analysis that the United States is now gradually intensifying the suppression of China's chip manufacturing industry, but the end result, the United States can successfully harvest these allies, instead of standing with China to occupy most of the international chip market. The logic of this analysis sounds really a bit pie in the sky, but quite interesting, from the US chip bill, and is now engaged in the so-called four-party chip alliance. The chip bill is mainly for high-end advanced process chips, while the chip alliance is to start from the low end and the market to jam China. In the four-party chip alliance, mainly to look at South Korea and Taiwan, Japan for the time being, because Japan is not the most important in this regard, the United States to keep an eye on South Korea's Samsung and Hynix, to keep an eye on Taiwan is TSMC, MediaTek and Sun Moonlight. To say that the chip, the US Intel is unable to do TSMC memory chips, the US Micron and cannot do Samsung Hynix, then how? Think about it the other way around. If you can't catch up when or in the short term you are difficult to catch up, how? You cannot catch up, cannot pull their level down? Put them to hold up? The United States is now forcing South Korea and Taiwan's more competitive enterprises. You have to go to the United States to set up factories, that reduces the efficiency of the operation, and then engage in a US priority through the policy, pull down Samsung and TSMC level, disguised to enhance Intel's competitive ability, but also to prohibit South Korea and Taiwan's enterprises in China to expand and expand. This time will lead to the Chinese chip is bound to take a path of attack breakthroughs, thereby gradually replacing foreign products to occupy the low-end chip market. The United States also knows that he cannot control China. To China's scientific research and market lure, that is unable to control China's local enterprises, they will certainly make a breakthrough on this road, in this piece of sitting and watching China to grow. However, in the high-end chips, advanced process chips, this piece, the United States is basically in the hands of the United States to South Korea and Taiwan to copy the advanced process capacity to the United States, and to limit their expansion to China, that remains in South Korea and Taiwan those remaining capacity. How to do? The United States through military and political means to trigger georelational conflict, these capabilities to cut them off. In fact, it is not so much to say that we must trigger something big, as long as the creation of sufficient crisis, it is enough. What would be the end result? That is, China through its own independence to occupy the majority of the low-end chip market, while the United States has become the dominant advanced process high-end chips. At this time, as long as the special approval of Intel and other US companies into China's high-end chip market, that will dominate almost the global market, South Korea, and Taiwan manufacturers can only make a living with Western customers, that he has a relatively small proportion of this piece, the US. This is a comprehensive harvest of South Korea and Taiwan. This logic sounds like a bit of a pipe dream, but this logic makes sense.